Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Destiny Pinder-Buckley, and I'm in my final year here at the UNLV Creative Writing Program, specializing in nonfiction. Thank you, everyone, thank you just for joining the Black Mountain Institute and Fantagraphics for the State of Comics Publishing with Eric Reynolds, Megan Kelso, and Diana Schutz to discuss the past, present, and future of comics in the U.S. And our conversation today will be moderated by UNLV Creative Writing Program alum Charlie Joy, with some time for audience questions at the end. So also for moderation, if you have a question, just go ahead and put it in the chat and we will be able to forward those questions to Charlie for the end. So at any point, if you have a question, feel free to place it in the chat and that way we can get it there for you. Please also join BMI at another virtual event with Fantagraphics, the Research and Nonfiction Comics with Ellen Forney and Caitlin Cass on October 2nd, also at noon Pacific time. Free registration and full details are available at blackmountaininstitute.org. I would like to thank BMI's donors, Beverly Rogers, Miriam Shearing, and the Rogers Foundation. And this program is co-presented by Fantagraphics. So now let's introduce today's panelists. Eric Reynolds is the Vice President and Associate Publisher of Seattle's Fantagraphics Books. He has edited books by a who's who of contemporary graphic novelists, including Daniel Clowes, Charles Burns, Joe Sacco, Alan Forney, Gilbert and Jaime Hernandez, and Megan Kelso, as well as luminaries including Jack Black, Maria Bamford, and Robert Pollard. His writing has appeared in the Comics Journal, Juxtapoz, The Stranger, and elsewhere, and he has co-authored the book Michael Dormer and the Legend of Hot Curl. He is an Eisner and Inkpot Award winner for his contribution to the medium of comics. Next, we have Megan Kelso, who has been drawing comics for over 30 years. In 2007, she was invited by the New York Times to serialize her Watergate Sue, I don't know why I put that in quotes, sorry, it's in quotes, that's how you read it, comic as part of the weekly Funny Pages features. In 2019, she was selected for a public art commission for the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle. Her books include The Squirrel Mother, Artichoke Tales, Queen of the Black Black, and Who Will Make the Pancakes? 5 stories. We also have Diana Schutz joining us today, who is an award-winning editor who began working in the comics in 1978, becoming an editor in 1981. After editorial stints at both Marvel Comics and Comico, she became senior executive editor at Dark Horse Comics, where she was on staff from 1990 to 2015. She was Frank Miller's editor on Sin City and 300, Matt Wagner's editor on Grendel, Stan Sakai's editor on Usagi Yojimbo, Harvey Picard's editor on American Splendor, and Larry Marder's editor on Bean World. The first woman to be inducted into the Canadian Comic Book Creator Hall of Fame, Schutz was honored with the Eisner Comics Industry Hall of Fame Award in 2023. And last, but certainly not least, we have our moderator today, Charlie Joy. Charlie They/Them is an Afro-Jamaican British writer based in Las Vegas. They just completed their MFA in fiction, and Charlie is currently working on a speculative short story collection and a novel. So with that, thank you. I will now give it off to Charlie and today's panelists.
Thank you so much, Destiny. That was awesome introductions. Hi, everyone. As was just said, I'm Charlie Joy. I'm a writer and a comics enthusiast, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk with Eric, Megan, and Diana about the state of comics publishing. So first, I would like to start and ask the panel if they could share for 2 to 3 minutes, a quick summary of their careers and relationships to comics for the audience to get to know you a bit more before we dive into my questions. Maybe we can start with you, Megan.
Sure. Let's see. I started drawing comics in my last year at college. I went to the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, which encourages independent study. And so I did an independent study contract to make a comic book. And it was called Girl Hero. And I made 50 copies at Kinko's. And I'd always loved to draw and write stories, and I was a little bit new to comics. I didn't really grow up reading a lot of comics, but as soon as I started making them, it felt like I'd found my medium. Like I just knew that this was what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life as an artist. And it was kind of amazing because I was 21 years old, and it's pretty much never wavered. So I went on to continue self-publishing Girl Hero for the next few years. And then I have also been published by Fantagraphics. So I've had 4 books come out through Fantagraphics. And recently I've started making mini comics again. So I guess I'm crossing over from self-publishing to being published to self-publishing again. And also I wanted to mention that both Diana and Eric have played the role of my editor at certain times, which is, I kind of have forgotten, Diana, that you invited me to do a short story in Dark Horse Presents sometime in the 90s. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, right now I'm, well, I would say I am a pretty restless artist. I don't really tend to stick with a particular style or way of doing comics for very long. And I'm currently in, strangely feeling, at least, a kind of experimental phase, which has a correspondence to making comics on 3-dimensional objects. And I'm really just like kind of at the beginnings of this. I don't have it figured out by a long shot. And it kind of took me by surprise, but it's really exciting to be doing something new that I don't understand. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. Maybe we can go to you, Diana.
Oh, well, I guess it's fair to say that comics have been a huge part of my life since I first learned to read at age 5 in 1960 and discovered Supergirl. I turned 70 in a few months, and yeah, I still read 40, 50 graphic novels a year. So I'm very much a reader, an enthusiast, as you described yourself, Charlie. And I began, I think like Eric, working in retail, and very quickly after that started writing for the then extant Comics Press. So that would have been the early 80s. I was also publishing a little magazine for the chain of comic stores that I was working for at the time. And in that time, I wrote for the Comics Journal and for another magazine they were publishing back then, Amazing Heroes. So I have a long friendship with Fantagraphics, though never worked on staff with them. But from retail, and especially because of the writing gigs, writing reviews, doing interviews, that kind of thing, that led to a job offer in comics publishing. And I've worked, and I spent 30 years working in comics publishing, directly in comics publishing, as an editor. And Destiny read off some of the, read off some of the various people that I've worked with. So there's a long list of those, and I'm sure we can talk about that. But sometime while I was editing comics on a more than full-time basis, I also began teaching comics courses. This was back in 2002, and I taught for 20 years. But in 2002, I was the only game here in town in Portland. And now, of course, we have an entire comic studies program at Portland State University, where people take making courses, comics making courses, as well as comics history, theory, research courses. So it covers a wide scope for those who are interested in comics. Anyway, I've worked there I taught there from 2016 till 2022, and also have been translating comics. So I guess, going back to those first Supergirl stories that I read when I was a little girl, comics have remained a huge part of my life through all those years. And I've been lucky that I've been allowed to investigate sort of a variety of careers within the industry. Megan, there's right, in Queen of the Black, which was published in 1998. I came across this last night, and I think it's, if you'll bear with me, Megan writes, let me just say this: I plan to be drawing comics when I am an old woman, barring early death or a freak accident. Maybe I'll own a skating rink, or maybe I'll be living on cat food omelets in a damp basement apartment. I hope not. But I will be making comics. Bear this in mind when you finish this book. Put it back on the shelf, forget about it. Then a few decades from now, which is now, pick it up again, read it, and you will say, so this is where she began. And I think for all three of us, and maybe for all of us here today, this notion of I will be making comics has been the driver all along.
Thank you, Diana. I appreciate that. Eric?
Sure. That was a great quote, by the way. That was fantastic. Megan and I have known each other since we were young people, and so that's somehow really kind of life affirming to hear. Like Diana, I've just had sort of comics in my DNA for literally as long as I can remember. I don't remember not reading comics. When I grew up in the 70s and into the 80s, I was raised on American newspaper comic strips like Peanuts and Calvin and Hobbes. And then, by the time, and then also at the same time, American comic books. When I was in grade school and in the middle school, I would literally like embezzle money from my lunch money to set aside to buy comic books on this, and would go to 7-Eleven to buy them. And then when I was in middle school, a classmate of mine told me that there was this store a few miles away that sold nothing but comic books. I didn't even know, that there was a comic book store where I grew up in California. And, and I would ride my bike miles and miles, at least, once a week to go to this place. And when I was about 15, there was a kid who worked there, a little older than me, and I overheard him telling the boss that he had to quit because he was joining the army. And I just totally hovered, like a buzzard. And as soon as the kid was gone, I was like, can I work here? And I ended up working there all through high school and into college. Never really considered comics would be such a part of my life, this long, but Diana mentioned sort of having a variety of careers. And I think that's a testament to your love for the medium, that you kind of find your path wherever you can find it. when I was in college, I was I studied literature and journalism at UC Irvine. I was the managing editor of the university paper there, but I was also the de facto staff cartoonist. And I wrote reviews of comics for the entertainment section. And then in 1993, I moved to Seattle and got a position at Fantagraphics, working on their magazine, The Comics Journal, which kind of like Diana's entry, it was basically working in the comics press and kind of fan press, whatever you want to call it. I did that for a while, and then I was so deeply invested in the cartoonists that Fantagraphics published. I was a huge fan of a lot of their comics before I started working there. And I just kind of organically transitioned over to the publishing side from the journalism side. And I've been doing that for almost 30 years now. I've been at Fantagraphics for 31 years.
Thank you so much, Eric. Yeah, like the range that you three have between you is extensive, and it's awesome. So I'll get right into the questions that I have for you all. So, and we can go in the order, or if that we went in just now, if that feels good. So yeah, firstly, like in your opinions, what are the most exciting things happening in comics and comics publishing at the moment that you see?
Well, I guess if I could reframe the question to like exciting things about publishing in the sort of window in time that I've been involved in comics, I can speak to that more clearly, because it turns out when you've been doing something for 30 years, you really do get to witness different historical phases. And it's kind of incredible, and it's kind of like humbling to truly see and realize that nothing remains static. Because when I started drawing comics, there was, the underground cartoonists were still, all of them alive and still making comics. And the kinds of comics I made were sort of starting to be called alternative comics, but they were like definitely an outgrowth of the underground comics. And I was really inspired by the book Twisted Sisters, which was a collection of women cartoonists, both underground and more younger alternative cartoonists. And it was a really amazing collection, but to be honest, like it felt like there weren't really that many female cartoonists. And that just completely changed in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it seems like it had a lot to do with kids starting to read manga, and manga being as appealing to girls as it was to boys. Whereas there was still this kind of thing in America of like superhero comics. And, I know Diana is a huge fan of all comics, but there was this like, guy thing with superhero comics. And when manga came along and became more available in the United States, yeah, it just appealed to girls in a new way. And I started to notice that like a lot of women were teaching comics classes, and just could like draw the pants off a lot of the guys. And that just, I don't know. I mean, there was really this like strong, like girls can't draw thing going on when I started making comics. It's like, feels so weird to even say. It feels so weird to even say, but it was really a current, and it just isn't anymore. And so that's just kind of an amazing thing to witness. The other thing is that there are just so many comics for kids and for middle school aged kids and for teenagers, and just a huge and wide swath of different kinds of readers. And that just wasn't so true when I started making comics either. I don't always feel like I fit in with these publishing currents, but I am just really happy to see that they're out there.
Thank you, Megan. Diana, maybe?
Well, I don't know if I have much to add to what Megan said. In considering this question, the first thing that struck me, of course, is the wealth of reads, of comics reads that are now available. And, you know, Megan, you're going back 30 years, and I'm going back 65 years to what was available to me as a child to read. And, you know, we did not have comic book stores in those days because comics were sold everywhere. But it was a very specific type of comic, published monthly in a floppy format. And in terms of genres, you had superheroes, the teen comics, Archie comics, and then what we call funny animal comics, basically. These were our choices, and they were geared towards younger readers by and large. So nowadays, of course, as Megan mentioned, comics are published for readers of all varieties and all ages, all interests. I think we might be losing, you know, in the 80s, we pushed really hard to remind people that hey, comics are not just for kids, and they can be for grown-up readers too. And I worry that we're losing that a little bit. Or maybe I don't know, maybe I'm shopping at the wrong stores, I'm not sure, but there don't seem to be quite as many of those. Or perhaps it's just that there is such a wealth of books, comic books of one sort or another available to us to read that you know, I'm spoiled by this now. And certainly, yeah, the advent of women, the advent of comic stores into the industry, the advent of the bookstore, when bookstores opened their arms to us, and now the fact that universities have discovered comics, I think is a real blessing for all of us, you know. So yeah, I don't know, exciting things that are happening right now. From where I sit, I'm seeing more and more work coming in from other countries. And as a translator of French and Spanish comics, I'm glad about that on a personal level, but as a reader, I'm particularly glad about that. I grew up in Montreal, and I grew up reading French comics, European comics, and so I think it's fantastic that American culture is widening its acceptance of other cultures as well, because they, you know, yes, manga is huge, but they're really almost every country has its own comics culture, and we widen our own culture when we open our eyes to others. So
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Diana. I love that. And I wonder if Eric, if you could speak to that too.
Well, I thought it was interesting what Megan said about having this perspective of doing this for a few decades, because it's something that's only really kind of come into focus for me over the last 5-10 years now that I'm been doing this for so long, and which is that you do see these the evolution and the generational shifts. And when I think back to when, I first started reading comics, I mean, it was not only a boys' club, it was like this really narrow-minded, kind of hostile boys' club that didn't even want other boys coming in if they weren't doing exactly what they wanted them to do. And in that regard, when I'm thinking about what's exciting, well, for one, you have to separate the art versus the commerce. And on the artistic side, it's things are really pretty great. On the commerce side, you can get into some questions that like what Diana brought up about, how the proliferation of comics for younger readers is sort of squeezing the adult readership in a real practical way in bookstores. But that's like a business kind of industry thing that maybe we don't want to get into or not. But the art form is, extremely healthy, and the idea that both globally and internationally, and in terms of gender and race and different perspectives, the openness to everything is really earth-shattering compared to where it was even 20, 25, 30 years ago. And how could you not be excited by that? And then, it's sort of our jobs, for those of us working in the business side, to try to, figure out how to make the distribution and retail side, reflect that, because there's still a lot of obstacles to a publisher like Fantagraphics, or the types of books that Diana was editing, mature kind of literate work for adults, and getting that out there. It's like it's both taken seriously now in a way that it wasn't even 25 years ago, as an art form and a medium for personal expression. But but in some ways it's actually gotten even more difficult to kind of to try to really sell that work on kind of a more mass market level, and not have it be this kind of niche industry or art form, really.
Yeah, no, so it's amazing to me how far comics have come, and the different areas that we find comics in. And I'm always curious about that, about the different areas that comics inhabit. So, whether that's memoir, fiction, poetry, there's so many different places comics can go and thrive. And I wondered, have you been surprised by the reach of comics throughout your careers, like the different places that we find comics, and people from all over the world, sort of interpret comics for themselves?
Yes, 100%.
yeah, I mean, the first San Diego con that I ever attended was 1982. There were
It was the same year I went.
there were 4,000 people there. And I was there this past summer, and I, again, maxed out the convention center at 130,000 people. So, I mean, yes, it's, for me though, there's a little bit of be careful what you wish for there, because not all those people are comics fans, would that they were, and they were all buying your books, right? But comics has sort of found itself a place within pop culture, I guess, insofar as the conventions are concerned. And that does open up. I mean, it's brought people to us, but I'm not sure it's brought committed readers to us.
Well, if I could jump in, I have to admit that I still see the comics world from a sort of Cold War binary, 20th century binary. That, and you know, when I think about the San Diego Comic-Con and Marvel movies and Marvel and DC, when I first started drawing comics, it was definitely felt like us against them. The people I hung out with and made comics with, we were either self-publishing or had very small publishers, and what was happening over at Marvel and DC seemed to have very little to do with our interests and what we cared about. But it was still such a small world that we all came together at the San Diego Comic-Con. But like I said, to me, it felt kind of us versus them. And I get the sense that younger cartoonists and the publishing world writ large that publishes comics doesn't really see it that way as much as I do. But I would say that the sort of small, weird art comics world that I still think of myself as part of, what we have found as a way to get our comics into the world that's, like, at the moment, I think more effective almost than retailing is comics and zine shows, which are everywhere, and they're not very big, and they're not super efficient either, truth be told, because you do have to travel to get to them, or if you don't travel much, there's only a few in your area per year. But it really does seem to keep the kind of spirit of art comics and strange experimental comics that really can't make it in the larger marketplace alive. And I'm on the board of our local comics show, which is called Short Run, and it's been going for over 10 years now. And we get cartoonists coming from all over the world, and we get attendees coming from all over the country, and it's free. So the artists actually have a chance to make money, because the attendees are spending it at the tables and not just to get in. And we try and keep the table fees really low for cartoonists, which is really not the case at those larger Comic-Cons. The table fees are exorbitant at the big Comic-Cons, but at Short Run, they're very modest. So the cartoonists who come actually make money. And I think that's the ethos of a lot of these smaller comics and zine shows that are all over the country, and I think all over the world at this point. And it's still probably true that very few cartoonists are going to make a living from the comics work that they do. I mean, that's true of all artists and very much true of cartoonists, but the possibility of getting your work out in that way, I think, is stronger than ever. And I find that really inspiring and heartening.
Yeah, I agree. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, like, given that, I guess it depends on a number of factors in terms of how if your art will get out there, and if people will pay attention to your comics. Like, what do you have specific advice for people who are interested in breaking into the comics industry, that whether that's attending these comics and zine shows, and or some other way that they can really get involved?
I think the first thing you have to do is ask yourself, what kind of a cartoonist do you want to be? What kind of comics do you want to make? Because there was always a sharp divide, as Megan was saying, and I felt very much the same way, that we were sort of defined as much by what we were in opposition to as the stuff that we were into. And you know, we were very anti-mainstream, and coming from more of a DIY, you know, kind of 80s, you know, punk alternative kind of scene. And unfortunately, like, you know, we have reached a point where there is this sort of sharp divide between the kind of work that Megan does and the hugely phenomenally successful work that, you know, maybe appears from some of the more mainstream publishers or even Webtoon or whatever. And you have to kind of figure out, like, am I doing this because I have something really personal to express, like Megan does? Like, she determined that she figured out that comics were the best way for her to kind of express the story she wanted to tell. Or do you want to just draw and get hired wherever anybody will hire you to draw something? Because you have to have realistic expectations about, you know, either approach, and they're very different, you know, depending on what you want to do. Anyway.
Did anyone else wanna?
Yeah, it's certainly true that, you know, when we're talking about the state of comics publishing, that there are still basically two kinds of publishing, I guess. And one is monthly, more or less commercial comics, and the other is the publishing of graphic novels. Yeah, it's, I think, easier to make a living in the monthly commercial area, but I'm honestly not sure.
I think even that is changing. I think that has always been kind of traditionally the case, but and I hear so much chatter, and I'm not, you know, actively involved in that myself, but just from stuff that I read, I think that for a whole bunch of reasons, you know, that format is increasingly anachronistic and also really expensive.
Yeah, it's very expensive. I mean, as Megan noted earlier, I have I'm a little more small C Catholic when it comes to comics. I enjoy a wide variety of them for different reasons, and teaching for 20 years really fueled that as well, because you know, when you're studying how comics work and how words and pictures work together, it's informative to kind of consider the gamut of comics, the kinds of comics that are made, the genres, the different genres, what was happening in 1940 when artists were just beginning to understand the page, and what it could do as opposed to a single tier of panels. So yeah, but even though I like to read many comics for many different reasons, the floppy thing is too expensive for me to support, and I'm quite happy to wait for a graphic novel if there is a particular floppy that interests me for whatever reason. So, and paper costs continue to escalate. Comic stores order those floppies just in numbers, I guess, for their specific customers. Gone are the days when you could walk into a shop and see everything. But again, that goes back to the wealth of what's available. Yeah, yeah. Like I said, be careful what you wish for. We really wanted comics to, we wanted to turn the world on to our passion for comics, but perhaps not quite in the way it's happened.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I guess Eric could probably speak to this more than I, but comics are struggling with the same, overall problems that book publishing struggles with. And the numbers of readers and people who buy books, I get the sense is just, is just shrinking. And certainly there's wonderful ways to do comics digitally, and it's a lot cheaper, and the barrier to entry for people just getting started in a lot of ways is lower. It's not the way I got started, but that's just because that wasn't the internet didn't really exist in such a graphic way in the 90s when I started. So making paper comics was, just the only way. And now making paper comics, at least in the kind of small publishing and self-publishing world, making paper comics is a bit of a choice, and often a slightly more expensive choice than, say, deciding to do online comics. And I think, there's this term I've been hearing more and more lately, physical media. Like my daughter thinks it's just really cool to go to thrift stores and buy DVDs. She thinks they're like this awesome, like retro medium. But I have noticed that short run over the last few years, there is this with younger people, there does seem to be this kind of interest / nostalgia / fascination with making paper books and paper comics. And I think we kind of have to face facts that the numbers are always going to be small from here on out. It's expensive, it's bulky, it's niche. It just kind of is. But I certainly don't feel discouraged by that, because I guess I never really entered into comics, the realm of comics that suggested I would have some kind of, widespread appeal. And I've always thought of like the work that I did as a calling that I could make money at, in and out, up and down from time to time, but not in any kind of reliable way. And I was thinking about this talk yesterday, and I was thinking, yeah, comics as a calling is a little bit like deciding to have a child is a calling. Like you don't go into having a child thinking like, this is going to be a great money maker for me. Like, maybe your child will grow up to be a professional athlete and you will make a lot of money, but like, that's not why you enter into it. And, I know this sounds probably very impractical, like to enter into something that's so time consuming that you can't have any promise of making a living at. But, there's a pretty big historical precedent for people making these ridiculous choices and finding some way or other to survive, having some other job, some side hustle, some day job, so that they can pursue the calling. Often people will ask me like, well, are you like a famous cartoonist? Like people who don't really read comics or know anything about comics. And I say, well, I'm famous the way like if you were a well-known poet, like you're not you're still not known or cared about by the larger world, but like, you know, within a sort of small sphere, people know who you are. So, you know, I hope I don't sound like a downer, but that's kind of more or less always how I've thought about it.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us got into this for the money. I mean, you know, no matter what work we've done, translation work pays terribly. But there's a passion that we have, and particularly for you, Megan, as an artist. I mean, this is something that we have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, what's clear to me is that people will continue to make the art they feel compelled to make, and find the communities that will uplift them, and support themselves in ways that artists have always been supporting themselves, even if they haven't had the monetary support, right? I have other questions, but we're running low on time. But I would love to get some questions from the audience answered. So one of them is, and feel free, any of you, to jump in. Is any thought being given to alternative distribution models for home online consumer?
That's an Eric question.
It's
Yeah,
an interesting question.
great.
Maybe Eric, yeah.
So the fact of the matter is, right now in traditional publishing, and in that digital sales are still way, 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 way smaller than print sales. There was this conventional wisdom 10, 15 years ago that ebooks were going to completely destroy print. And that's like 100% been proven to not be true. Print is much healthier. And what's evolved over the last few years is that there is a healthy audiobook market, which, comics have not traditionally been able to quite make that segue in a meaningful way, with the exception of, like, there was a big budget Sandman production and a few other things. And ebook and digital sales have really consolidated into the hands, of a few small players, especially Amazon, the ever-present, just threat to the ecosystem that of so many things, not just comics or books. So that's sort of a long-winded way of saying yes and no. I mean, we've explored ways to distribute our own ebook, and do them DRM free in a way that enables us to try to get out from under, the Amazon's dominance in the market share. But it's frankly pretty small potatoes, and it's hard for a small company like us to devote the resources to doing that. Where I would say that I see it the most, and that we have put efforts into, is libraries. Almost, I live in Seattle. The number of graphic novels that you can read through the Seattle Public Library digitally, either through Hoopla or Overdrive, to platforms that partner with public libraries to offer electronic content. You can read almost everything, being published in a more traditional sense. That's not going to help you with the kinds of really cool, handmade small press stuff that you'll find at Short Run. But it is, I think, probably the most, like, for the bang for your buck. It's the best hope for not just getting comics into the hands of actual book fans and book readers, but also kind of trying to break this corporate hegemony that's settled in the world of digital books.
Thank you. So the next question is from Bradley, and it's a question for Diana. Bradley says, I just wanted to ask if you had any stories you'd like to share about Canadian comic book creator Hall of Fame member Bernie Mirialt, who passed away this month.
Yeah.
He was a great artist whose work had trouble staying in print.
Yeah, boy, that's recent grief for me.
Mm.
His name is pronounced Miro, Bernie Miro. And Bernie was in many ways an artist. Uh, and though I offered him a lot of work, he didn't always take it. And you know, on principle, he was committed to the art that he wanted to make. And unfortunately, that art didn't find the audience Bernie needed to really, you know, stay alive, support his family from that. And so, boy, he was a good guy, and you know, to comics, Jack Kirby is famously credited with saying comics will break your heart. And yeah, I think comics broke Bernie's heart.
Mm.
Thank you, Diana. So the next question's from Aidan, and Aidan says, I'm curious about the larger alternative comics publishing ecosystem. Having seen many small publishers disappear, and Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly being the two big that sustain, what would you like to see change, or how do you think there could be more sustainability in the middle ground?
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. I agree. I think Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly enjoy the benefit of having been around long enough to enter the marketplace and the proper book trade in North America in a way that sort of grandfathered us in. Because if you're a small publisher starting out now with just 1, 2, 3 books, even more, you're going to have a really hard time getting any traction in the kind of mass market distribution level. It's still hard for us, and we've been doing it for 25 years now. We were one of the first publishers to break out of the comic shop market and actually get a proper book distributor that sold our books to independent bookstores, which was something that we always felt like we would have an even bigger potential audience amongst fans of serious literature as we would fans of what was then, you know, the comic book crowd, which was really mostly superhero fans. You know, kind of a bit of arrested development going on there. And I think all of this speaks to consolidation, corporate consolidation. You know, so much of the paths, so many of the paths to enter the marketplace just consider doors could get closed left and right. And it's really, you know, as a cartoonist, for example, you know, I see cartoonists increasingly reliant on a small group of patrons or fans or whatever you want to call them, in a way that is great if you can make that work for yourself. But I don't think it's sustainable long term. If everybody has to do that, then, you know, it's going to get harder and harder. So what I would like to see change is I would like to see just wider distribution for, I mean, the US publishing industry now is, you know, really consolidated into a small number of publishers and an even smaller number of distributors. And it's true on the comic book side of things too, the comic book shop market. It's comic book retailers it costs them more to buy their books to resell than it ever has, and they have fewer options as to where to get them. And it's really true on the book trade side of things too. I don't have the answers for how to fix that. That's like, you know, that's beyond my area of expertise, even though I've been involved with it a long time. But I think it is a serious issue, especially for, like I said, adult literary audiences. A lot of these things that comics are going through aren't limited to just comics. I think it extends to serious literature, serious adult fiction as well. And even serious, you know, independent filmmaking, serious independent music. And when I say serious, I'm not talking about the work, you know, is serious in content. It can be funny or whatever, but it's harder and harder for those creators and, you know, the people that put it out in the world to get attention. And even in bookstores, you know, you see there are more comics in a general independent bookstore than there have ever been, which is great. But it's also become increasingly consolidated into the manga and YA categories, and it's leaving even less room for, you know, work like Emil Ferris or Daniel Clowes, or I mean, and those are the exceptions who've done, you know, really well. You know, Kate Beatons or the Tamakis, and but for those that, you know, that aren't even as successful, and I put success a little bit in quotes, as those artists, like it's hard out there. It's harder to get a publisher. It's harder to get a distributor. It's harder to get a book face out on a shelf in front of the eyes of people who actually want to buy books.
You know, I work in a bookstore, and I'm proud to say that we have a really good, extensive comic graphic novel comic book section. So that makes me feel proud. But I totally hear what you're saying, Eric.
I was talking to a bookseller just a couple of weeks ago who runs a bookstore in Baltimore called Atomic Books, a really great bookstore. And he was telling me how many copies of a particular book he sold. And it was like astonishing, because if even, you know, even 500 other bookstores or 250 other bookstores could sell that many, like our sales would be incredibly more successful. It's
Right.
you know, so a bookstore like yours, God bless you, you know, because it's harder and harder all the time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I as a bookseller, I push graphic novels because I understand it's hard out here.
Is that, Charlie, that's an independent bookstore?
So I work for the Writer's Block in Las Vegas. It's an independent bookstore, yes. So yeah, the Writer's Block.
Yeah,
Great name.
because the notion of corporate consolidation, I think, is affecting our industry as it's affecting all industries. And you know, when your personal work that you have poured your heart and soul into becomes nothing more than a number, and maybe a negative number on a spreadsheet. This is how some of these things are decided today, you know, and to me, it's incredibly scary to see it happen everywhere, not just to us.
Yeah,
no,
I'll be honest. I've shed tears. I've shed tears over this because of exactly what Diana said, you know, that you put a lot of work into making a book, and it's hard not to have like high hopes for it, you know, like maybe this will be the one that'll break through and I'll become an international sensation. And it's I'm 56 now, and so I've done this a number of times, and you know, it hasn't happened. And so it's starting to feel a little bit delusional.
I'm still there, Megan.
I wanted to call back to Diana reading my manifesto that I put in my very first book. And I gotta say, everybody, beware the power of the manifesto, because I think about that from time to time. Oh, well, I promised the world I'd be drawing comics until I was an old lady. I guess I better keep it up. So yeah, it's weird that incantation I created for myself actually has had an effect on me.
Yeah, it's been so good to hear you all chat. And I think as a bookseller and just as a comics enthusiast and as a writer myself, I think supporting one another and word of mouth and telling each other about everyone's work is one of the ways we can push against, I guess, this idea that maybe we're not getting seen the way we want to be seen. And that's at least what, I guess the energy I would love to leave this panel on. So I just would love to say thank you so much to Megan and Eric and Diana. Thank you to the BMI team and Destiny, and thank you to the audience for tuning in and engaging with us today. It's been a really awesome panel. I've learned a lot. So I just wanted to say thank you. And yeah, take care.
Thank you very much.